Ladies, gentlemen, and paladins of all ages, surprise, the new class is here right now. Call me absolutely shocked. I did not at all think that this would happen, but just last night we had the Game Awards, Blizzard made a big deal of marketing around it, and we all sort of expected the next expansion to get announced and revealed, which it did, but there was a small group of the player base saying, hey, maybe it'll be a paladin released out of nowhere, and maybe it will be playable literally at that moment, and most of us said, yeah, that's not gonna happen because the chances of that seemed astronomically low, but here we are. It happened. The new expansion was revealed, pre-orders opened up, and anyone who pre-orders the expansion gets instant access to the Paladin right now in Season 11. So, with that said, I'm going to go over my first impressions of the class, the skills, the skill tree, any legendaries or uniques I've either found myself or am looking forward to in the future. Basically just my early thoughts on the class as a whole and some skills and synergy stuff as I progress a bit slower than normal, because I am spending a lot of time messing around with stuff instead of just straight up blasting. And I'll talk about the things that have worked best for me while leveling, with the caveat that there definitely could be better leveling setups than these. These are just the best ones that I've been messing with as of this point. For now, though, let's just get into it. Paladin is here, and it's just freaking incredible. Obviously, a bit of bias as someone who has played every season of this game since launch, including pre-release tests and stuff, so a new class is always a breath of fresh air. But there's just something about flails and shields and holy auras that will never fail to make me smile. As far as actual gameplay then, there is a lot going on here, and it has more skill enhancement options than any other class does currently, because it is of course built around the expansion, and this will be then happening for every class once that releases, but Paladin has come out now with all of the extra enhancements already baked in. That said, if you are overwhelmed on character creation, I'm just going to walk through a few different ways you can build up while leveling to blast through the early stages of the game from the things that I have been testing. There are three sort of main setups that I want to recommend for early gameplay, including a bit of movement between them, but those only take effect a few levels in really, especially as we don't start with renowned skill points the moment that you start the season. When you have your third skill point, you want to just immediately rush down to Holy Light Aura. You don't necessarily want to keep this skill on your bar forever, depending on how you choose to build moving forward, but it passively deals damage around you just as you exist in the world, and the specific amount that it deals is enough to one-shot most enemies on normal difficulty from level like 1 to 10. So even outside of any other decisions that you make, any other skills that you take, just having this as something on your bar will carry you hard through like the first 10, even 15 levels, depending on what you're doing. Another very important skill that I imagine will hold true even in endgame once we get there is Rally. This grants movement speed and a burst of resource when used. Normally it has a cooldown, you take the enhancement for more speed and more faith, but then Word of Sacrifice as an enhancement down here makes it cost health and removes the cooldown. This means that you can literally spam this skill whenever you need resources, as long as you aren't in danger of dying from doing so. So as long as you have some kind of healing into your build, either from your gear, your stats, or something just like Holy Light Aura, which we just mentioned, and it does have a heal on the active portion. So with those things, you can just sort of spam Rally and have essentially infinite resource if you have enough healing to manage that. And the thing is, this is massive for leveling because a lot of early damage in general in the game comes from core skills or is applied through core skills. And the problem most classes have is maintaining enough resource to be able to spam core skills. Paladin immediately solved this quite well, just with this skill and this enhancement entirely very easily. The third thing that I think is worth calling out, regardless of playstyle or build type, is Falling Star. This is a movement ability. It is a very solid movement ability, very similar to Soar and how that works for Spiritborn, or for Sorcerer players it's like Teleport with a bit of a delay before launching. That makes it, of course, a very solid skill for leveling, absolutely for sure. That said, let's get into actual leveling setups that I would recommend, two of which are based on just Thorns, and I'd recommend waiting to use those until level 20 because of the Thorns elixir. The third one though is a classic Diablo Paladin style build, which is an orbiting Blessed Hammer build. Blessed Hammer spirals out when you cast it by default. It is low resource cost, and the idea is that you spam out as many of these as you can and they just keep spinning and hitting stuff. The forced base enhancement on this one makes it be able to hit enemies multiple times. This is of course a big deal for this skill, of course, as they will spin around you and you want it to connect with the same enemy multiple times, doing damage each time. But then Disciple's Halo, the middle skill enhancement here, converts it into a Disciple skill, but that will come up later. But more importantly, for our immediate purposes, it makes the hammers spin around you and follow you as you move, so you can directly sort of just aim them and make them purposefully hit things, and when you get a big clump of hammers built up from the setup by just spamming out the ability, it plays sort of like the boulder build does for Druid, but without requiring legendaries and uniques to get that playstyle to function. This one is very, very potent for leveling. I was walking through enemies no problem. If playing with this, you would want to get the Blessed Hammer skill itself up to rank 5, so you'd want to get all 5 points into there early on for the extra damage, and I would recommend for basic skill using Clash, as well as Enhanced Clash, which gives you the Crusader's March buff for a few seconds. This stacks up upon itself, and by default it gives you Resolve and some extra block chance, but instead what we'll be doing in this build is taking Skirmish as an enhancement. This makes the skill become a Zealot skill, which doesn't really matter that much for our purposes, but it means that it removes the block chance and Resolve bonuses of the buff, and instead gives you 10% crit chance per stack, stacking up to 3 times for 30% crit chance, which is a very hefty amount this early in the leveling process. Then to sort of just tie this up off a little bit with the top end stuff, it's slightly further points of leveling. Arbiter of Justice is a very, very, very strong pairing for this. It turns you into Arbiter form, which gives you bonus movement speed, a special evade, and just launches off wing attacks around you. Enhancement here makes the wing strikes happen more often, and then the Seraph's Wings upgrade gives you bonus movement speed, a ton of extra wing strike scaling, and then also makes enemies vulnerable for free while it's active, which is again just more bonus damage. This then pairs great with the key passive Exaltation for a massive damage boost during Arbiter, as well as doubling every wing strike attack, which is huge. And the big thing that ties all this together is the Choice of Oath, which is going to be the special class unique mechanic that has been added for Paladin. Disciple Oath right here makes it so that any cooldown based Disciple skills will put you in Arbiter form for a short duration, and increases Disciple skill damage while Arbiter form is active, including during the ult itself. The main trigger skill for this is going to be Falling Star for us. The movement skill is that is a cooldown based Disciple skill, and overall this just creates a really solid loop where you have lots of hammers, lots of damage, and big bursty spikes of damage whenever you get Arbiter form, either from this minor version after Falling Star or the full-fledged ultimate usage. Then we have our other 2 leveling setups, which are essentially variations of the same underlying concept, which is Thorns. Paladin has a lot of Thorns scaling potential as a class, and as we know from Spiritborn, Thorns can be insanely powerful as a way to scale damage during early stages of leveling. The reason for this is mostly the Thorns elixir. You can't make these until level 20, but as soon as you can, they scale insanely well. 150 Thorns at level 20 is a very, very high number, and while this amount is less comparatively incredible when you approach higher levels, like for example, even just Clash and the upgrades we have in Clash itself at level 35, which I am right now, gives me 294 Thorns, which is essentially double what the elixir gives me. But that said, this is the majority of my base Thorns, so the elixir is essentially an extra 50% of the thing we're using to scale our damage, even at level 35, and it's way more of a larger portion of it at lower levels, which makes us really, really good from the 20 to 40 area. Overall, I'd say without the elixir, Hammer generally feels stronger to level with, in my opinion. With the elixir on though, Thorns definitely feels stronger, and Thorns does actually scale pretty well as you get higher level too. But both concepts are extremely valid, very potent, so I just think that you should do what you find fun, what you think looks cool, or hey, mess around with the other skills, the things that I'm not talking about. I'm just recommending the stuff that I have tested that I know works incredibly well. That said, Thorns has a few ways to scale with the Paladin. The stronger one of the 2 for leveling at the very least is based around the Blessed Shield skill. This is the classic Paladin shield throw attack. It has an enhancement called Shield of Retribution that throws the shield out in front of you. It moves very slowly when you have this on, but it deals your Thorns as damage around it per second, and you can throw multiple shields at the same time, so you can deal your full Thorns value in an AoE multiple times per second, and this is by far the crux of what makes this setup work. Then we just scale Thorns as much as we can. The punishment enhancement from Clash, which we just sort of talked about vaguely, this makes it give you increasingly scaling Thorns. The amount of Thorns scales with your level, but it also scales with ranks in the base skill. So if you have 5 out of 5 ranks in Clash, this will be a lot higher than if you had 2 out of 5 ranks in Clash. It does genuinely go up, which means that all of your Thorns damage basically scales off of something like this, and because this is a base Thorns flat number, any sort of multipliers on Thorns damage, like you see there on punishment as well, will scale off of this very high flat number. The other thing that this enhancement gives you is 30% retribution chance, and this doesn't come up for this specific setup, but it will be important for the next one. So just to explain what retribution is, it is a chance for your Thorns to pulse in an AoE around you when you successfully block an attack, or do something that counts as a block. Is that something that Paladin does have access to? That said, for the setup, you also want the same generic things that we talked about earlier. Rally with the setup that we talked about before. Falling Star is a movement ability, of course, really good for this too. And then for your ultimate, I'm a big fan of pairing this with Heaven's Fury as an ultimate. This is just the big laser beam ultimate ultimate skill, and specifically the Walk with the Light enhancement up here, splits it into 5 separate orbiting beams, orbiting meaning that they circle around you as you move, so you can just walk around and have this thing apply the Judgement debuff repeatedly, doing a lot of damage as a result as well. The Judgement debuff, just to explain that, is a delayed pop of damage after it is applied. It's not a big deal in itself, but it is one of the best ways that we can scale our damage with our Oath choice that we'll talk about in a moment. As for the key passive on this one, I really just like straight up Coat of Arms for this. It gives you bonus damage based on armor and block chance, so the more that you have of those, the more this gives you, and it's just passive. It is a damage multiplier that you don't have to think about or work around at all. Then for the Oath for this one, we take Judicator. Everything dies in an instant, honestly, just from pure Thorns and Blessed Shield as a combo, it is that strong, but for anything like a big boss, this Oath will give you scaling damage against enemies the more times that Judgement procs against them. Use Heaven's Fury to apply loads of Judgement, it will proc a few times, you get bonus damage against that enemy that then scales your Thorns damage against them up as well. Then outside of that, there is things like the passive Thorns and Thistles on the skill tree right over here. This just gives you increased Thorns damage as a multiplier, which is quite a lovely thing to have in combination. And there's also Defiance Aura with the Rite of Thorns enhancement specifically. This gives you massive passive Thorn scaling increases as well, just all the time, and that is very juicy damage while leveling really, and it can also be used to actively pop for a multiplier of your Thorns damage in an AoE around you. The other option for a Thorn scaling leveling setup then is incredibly similar, as it is also based around Thorns, but with a few key differences. First, we will be applying Thorns through the Retribution mechanic that we talked about earlier, instead of through the actual Blessed Shield skill. Shield Bash as a skill here has this enhancement, which makes its Shield Bash hits count as blocks. This means that hitting with Shield Bash applies your Retribution chance, which is a chance to explode for Thorns in an AoE around you. So this basically is just another way of scaling damage off of Thorns. You can also increase the Retribution chance through the Breach enhancement on this too, or you can just improve the size of the attack in general so it hits more enemies by having the Lay Siege enhancement. Once you are a bit higher level though, which is where you'll probably be by the time that you get the Iron Barb's Elixir unlocked anyways, I would get rid of Shield Bash entirely and instead use Shield Charge. Specifically, what you want with Shield Charge is the Relentless Charge enhancement right here. What this does is turn Shield Charge into a core skill that you can hold down, and it costs you a faith per second that you hold it down. It lets you run forward at full speed with your shield up while you're doing this. It makes all of your hits count as blocking as well, just like Shield Bash did, so they can trigger Retribution when you hit with it, and it scales Retribution chance up per second the longer you hold the button down. So combined with our trick for having loads of resource due to rally, this becomes extremely potent. You can build up even further Retribution chance though through things like this passive here, which is just straight up bonus Retribution chance, or again the Clash basic skill, which we'll be using anyways with the enhancement here, gives you bonus Retribution chance as well. Then there is also the Aegis skill here, which I don't think that we talked about previously, but that was due to the way that this setup works in particular. For this build, I would actually drop Falling Star as a movement speed and replace it with Aegis. The main reason for this is that we can get to this enhancement over here, Impunity, and this means while Aegis is active, not only do you get increased Thorns scaling for all of your Thorns damage that we're applying, but you get 40% bonus Retribution chance. 40% Retribution chance from that, 18% Retribution chance from that puts you up to 58%, 30% Retribution chance from that puts you up to 88% chance of Retribution, then of course your extra 10%, which puts you to 98% as a base, going up per second to make you immediately above 100% after you've held the ability down just a little bit. And that's where this would get quite funky and would be able to scale quite well, and I'm quite hopeful that this will work even better in endgame than the other setups that I've been talking about so far. And that's pretty much everything for this build that isn't the same as the previous one, because everything else is the same. You want to use the same key passive, the same ultimate, pretty much everything else. Instead, just to cover them then, the other two key passives that we haven't talked about are Judgement Day. This gives you scaling damage increases when Judgement procs, and this could be very strong in endgame, but most leveling builds cannot be able to proc it fast enough for this to be worth it over the other options right now. Then Path of the Penitent, which gives you a lot of potential for sure. This could be very strong in the endgame as well, but again, it requires build-up to hit its peak and makes resource costs more expensive as well, which is very tough to manage while leveling, even with our rally setup, which does work, but if you're doubling your resource cost to be able to use this, it's not going to be worth it, at least while leveling. Then let's quickly go over the other two Oath options we haven't touched as well. Juggernaut gives you scaling Juggernaut skill damage increases with resolve stacks being spent to achieve it. We have multiple ways of gaining resolve, but the Juggernaut skills that we are using currently at least are being used to scale Thorns damage rather than their own damage itself, so this doesn't apply to them. However, it could work for Retribution, but then you're playing around with resolve stacks, and I think you just stand to gain much more from the things that we've already talked about. Then the Zealot Oath is quite unique, making Zealot skills bills basically just gain bonus hits, which is very fun conceptually, but definitely something that will need endgame scaling and gear and building around it to make it pop off properly. That said, just to call out some potent or exciting legendary aspects that I have not been able to get my hands on myself yet that I do want to talk about. Lappa's Scripture is high potential Thorn scaling and could work great in combination with the Juggernaut Oath, with the Shield Charge as well that we just talked about, using the Retribution procs and the Juggernaut Oath to spend Resolve, giving you bonus Thorns, which then increases the Retribution damage itself. And then you've also got the Verdant Restoration aspect, which perfectly syncs up with that as a good defensive aspect to mix in with these Thorns builds, healing you when you do Thorns damage. For the Orbiting Hammer setup, we turn that into a Disciple skill, which means that you can use this one here, which is Ligera's Sovereignty. This increases Disciple skill damage, just very straight up, very obvious that that would work well for anything Disciple based. Then something like the Holy Punishment aspect is massive if you are doing mostly holy damage, which you will be with the Blessed Hammer build, as this is just a gigantic damage multiplier in general. On top of that, Blizzard released a blog post detailing the uniques for the class, and just to call out a couple that excite me for more possible endgame focused concepts, obviously I'm just theory crafting, I'm not in endgame yet as of this moment. Herald's Morningstar is a unique mace that increases Blessed Hammer damage and gives you lucky hit chance to spawn bonus Blessed Hammers per hit. So if you have a Storm of Hammers, it will make more hammers, and the amount of more hammers you get depends on the amount of hammers that you're hitting and begin with. So you just get more hammers and more hammers and more hammers, and I love the way that sounds. Dawnfire is another one that I find quite interesting. Holy Light Aura is incredible for the first few levels, but it tapers off pretty quick. This unique makes it deal increased damage as fire damage, and any time that an enemy dies in the radius, the damage increases by 50% up to 10 times. So a total of a 500% increase, which is quite cool. I don't expect this to be like crazy strong enough to like carry an endgame meta build, but I do think the concept here is pretty fun. On the other hand, what I absolutely expect to be nuts is Griswold's Opus, a unique sword that gives increased crit damage for each enemy that you hit, and when you hit maximum stacks of the buff, you get lucky hit chance for double crit damage, healing, and to refresh the duration. So this has a lot of potential power, and I could honestly see a world where hammer builds might use this one instead of the hammer specific unique weapon, as it might just scale way better. But I'm way too early to make those kinds of predictions without actually seeing proper numbers either. That pretty much does it for me right now then, everyone. I want to get back to playing Paladin, honestly. This class has so much depth, so many ways to play, and these are just the 3 that I wanted to call out for popping off in this early leveling stage. And I wanted to sit down and explain some of the various mechanics and parts of Paladin as a whole, just to hopefully help you understand the class enough to be able to do your own stuff and find things that you consider fun without just being totally overwhelmed by everything that's going on. I'll have an endgame build for Paladin coming out soon once I reach that point, of course, and mess around with more stuff to find out what I actually want to build around. But for now, I hope this helps you all out. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.